Today is March 29th, 2022. I'm Skip Weber, and I am here taping Donald Sharp, who's 92 years old. We're in Metairie, Louisiana, and there's a storm about to come. It's very, very breezy, but he's going to tell us
how the first Sharps got in.
How the first Sharps got down to Louisiana and Mississippi.
Okay. Yeah, today's the 30th, I believe, isn't it?
Okay, March 30th then. Okay.
I'm talking about after 60. Well, it started. How I started off was my dad retired as an engineer from the IC Railroad. That trace they got over in St. Tammany used to be an IC Railroad. But anyway, he had an old Bible. It was Marshall Sharp's, the son of Joseph Sharp, who started the Bible in 1850 when he got married. Anyway, in there was the handwritten things about who was in there. My dad was familiar with the Sharps because his father, Edmund Sharp, left Mandeville about in the early 1890s. There was no work in St. Tammany. It was after the Civil War. Was pretty pathetic. When you go into the census, everybody was a laborer, and so forth. But anyway, my grandfather Edmund Sharp went to up to the St. James, St. John Parish, and got into the Cypress lumber making. He died after breathing. But anyway, when the last Sharps died in Mandeville, they had nicknames. One of them was named Dolly, and another was named Bull. They must have been pretty rugged little characters because they earned their living by basically the cattle that roamed in the woods and everything. They'd round them up, bring them to the lakefront, and put them on boats to go to New Orleans. But Dolly and Bull, the last one, I think it was Dolly, died, and he left the house and a piece of ground. And my Uncle Ed from Sheridan, Wyoming, came down in about 1935, I believe. I'm not sure exactly the date. And they went across the lake. I have pictures of them. And my Uncle Ed, this is interesting. My Uncle Ed and my father Clarence went through that. They were cleaning out the house. And in the backyard, they had this big iron can full up the top. On top of it was a Bible torn in half. My Uncle Ed took the Bible and he took it back to Sheridan and he had it repaired. And when he died, my Aunt Fanny passed it on to my dad, and now my dad's trying to pass it on to me. But that was the last Sharps in direct line of mine, ended in about 1935. So we kept the Bible, and when my dad retired, he didn't know what to do with himself. We tried to get him fishing, reading books, but he just sat like I'm sitting now, retired. And he pulled out this old Bible, and he says, Donald, I was teaching in California at the time. I'd come during the summer. He said, who are these people in Mandeville? He said, I see these names here, Marshall and this Marshall Jackson after General. I said, it's 19 right now. That was 1968, 69. The causeway was just completed. I said, okay, Dad, I'll go over there and see what I can find. So I got in the car and drove across, and then as soon as you got across, you hit gravel roads. And then I saw a sign, Sharp's Motors. So I said, well, that's a good place to start, Sharp's Motors. So I went there, and a man named was Cootsy, Zachariah Sharp. He had the oldest established Ford agency in the United States. After World War I, a year after, he started about 1920, 21, he started a Ford agency over there. he would have to come to New Orleans, get the cars, and go around by Baton Rouge or someplace. And he went over to Mandeville. Mandeville wasn't easy to get there. You had to cross the lake by boat and all that. But anyway, he started the fort. So he started filling me in. And he told me about going to see Edgar Sharp and so the old Pelican, who had a lot of stories to tell. And then Edgar said, you know, Donald, you ought to go to the courthouse, which I did, and I told you, meet Mrs. Neff, taking out these old land grants, which we got interested. Edgar also told me about, I'm trying to think of a name now, she lived in Audubon Park. She married a guy that had the piano company from Massachusetts. And she says, oh, I want to show you something. She showed me some few things, and she wanted to tell me about the cemetery over there, how they bought the cemetery, her grandfather, Zachariah Sharp. Oh, by the way, I have a picture of Zachariah. He was a good-looking man. He was a good-looking man. Anyway, and then she drops her something, a bombshell. She says, oh, you know, I got the marriage license and the bond of Joseph Sharp when he married Sarah Westcott Spell, the daughter of John Spell and so forth. I says, well, what are you doing with the marriage? In those days, people used to go and pilfer stuff. I don't know, I'm not saying who took it or anything like that. But I said, Mrs. I'll think of it in a minute. I said, please, before you, and she had a maid, and she had gardeners, and she had money. She lived by Audubon Park in a big house. I said, please, when you get a chance, put it back in the courthouse. I think it's back in the courthouse. I never did really check, but Mrs. Neff, I think, told me that it was back there. Anyway, this is getting started with the Sharps. So I'm going into it, to make it a long story short, how the first Sharps, I start researching it. And I get back to the first Sharp in Mandeville, or it was called Bayou Castan, was a George Sharp from Kentucky. So how did he get down here? Right after the American Revolution, and Spain got the territory. They started issuing land grants, but anyway, they had a big fire in New Orleans around 1789. This was the first trip down the Mississippi after General Wilkinson came down 2 years earlier and got he became a secret agent for the Spanish, but he got permission to have flatboats come down the river. So John, I have his diary, and he's got it page by page, and he's talking about he got 4 flatboats, went down the Kentucky River to the Ohio River, into the Ohio, Mississippi, and came on down. He did this in the spring of 1789. When he gets down to New Orleans 2 or 3 months later, he finds a lot of people living in tents. Oh, I'm sorry. Let me go back. They made 2 trips. The first trip, they unloaded their flatboats and everything. Sharp was on it. And they would cross the lake, pick up horses from the Spells, go up to around Baton Rouge, pick up the Natchez Trace, go up the Natchez Trace back to Kentucky. It was such a profitable experience that John Holley, Holley, but it's pronounced Ailey, and I got pictures of him. There's a newspaper clipping about what happened to him, what he did, where he's buried up in Kentucky. But he got another 4 flatboats together with stuff in it. This time, George Sharp was one of the captains of one of the flatboats. He gets stuck up along the Mississippi River and his diary, and they had to pull him loose and all that. They get down to New Orleans, and this is Fort 1791 now. And when they get down to New Orleans, they notice all these tents on the levee. one half of New Orleans was burned down the spring before, and they were desperate for food, wheat and everything like that. Holly's main crop was tobacco, but he did carry hams, food and stuff like that. So the Spanish governor, Estevan Miro, was desperate. But Holly says, you can have what I have on the flatboats for the cost. There's no raised price. Miro was so impressed and so happy with it, satisfied. George Sharp and his friend, his newfound friend, Zachariah Fairclough, who was a loyalist during the American Revolution. He fought as a lieutenant in South Carolina. He had to get out after the war. People, the loyalists, were not too welcome.
The loyalists meaning on the British side.
Yeah, loyalists are the loyal, and around, I think, South Carolina, one of the major cities, he was there. He became a lieutenant, but after the war, he was persona non grata. So he went to Kentucky, like a lot of people were doing, loyalists. They were going to Canada, back to England or Bahamas. Got out of the colony. But anyway, he made friends with George Sharp. And so when they came down here and they saw the fire after that, Governor Miro was so happy with them. George says, you know, I'd like to get a piece of land down here and stay there. Governor Miro was very generous. They had laws that you had to wait 4 years, you had to bring your kids up in the Catholic Church, you had to do this, he said, I'm waiving all these laws. There's 640 acres on Bayou Castan. So George Sharp took it in the latter part of 1791 from Miro. Miro leaves to go to South America. Carondelet comes in. Anyway, him and his good friend Zachariah. Zachariah plays a real important part in the history of Mandeville. But anyway, they start living up on Bayou Castan. They still have these British, some of the British settlers still on his property. They were not run off by the colonials that came down and made it a raid on the plantation. Anyway, after 4 or 5 years, George leaves. But while George was here for 2 years, he's writing back to his brothers in Kentucky. And his brothers were, 2 of them I know, well 3, the family had about 8 children, about 5 or 6 boys. But 2 of the boys were named Joseph and James. They decided to come down by pack horse, and they come down to Natchez Trace.
Was it Joseph William?
I never saw the middle name. I don't know where you got that from.
Okay.
But I didn't say anything about it. But if you say it's William, and so it was always Joseph to me. But anyway, they come down and they get to the outskirts along the river of Natchez, Coles Creek. You can find this in the book. They get a land grant. They settle down. James was with him. They had a third brother. The third brother got off and settled at the borderline of Tennessee and Kentucky, and I read a story about the ancestors of his third brother, which is mentioned too. But he stayed up. They were looking for land. Anyway, Joseph marries, and I'm guessing it because it all fits in, but it does. I don't have a marriage license in it. But he married a Richardson girl. Very important, because Richardson is the one that takes the land that Mrs. Ambrose leaves, which is right up on the causeway where you see where that concrete place was, the inlet and all that. That was all Zachariah.
It's Elizabeth Richardson.
Yeah. It was Elizabeth. She had a sister named Martha. But anyway, so here's Zachariah and George settle down. After 4 years, George decides he wanted to go back up. So he sells Zachariah for $40. This is in the records. His 640 acres. It was on a path going to Bayou Lacombe. They had a little bridge there. He leaves in 1797, approximately. He goes back. I'm sure he saw his brothers by Natchez going the way up. He gets married up in lost track of it, but I did see story. He gets married to Harrods. They're all related to the Boones. And actually, Indian territory was getting open there. It's called Indiana today. And that's where he went up. But anyway, here we have the two brothers left, down in Natchez. The Spanish start passing laws to make it tough. They wanted to stop the Americans from coming down in droves. So they said, you have to wait 4 years, you have to bring your kids up in the Catholic. And this was very odious to them who were the Baptists and Protestant. So Joseph sells his piece of land, Wilkinson County, and he comes down to St. Helena. He goes to a little creek, a little branch of the Tickfaw River. He builds a little cabin for himself, and he builds a little cabin to make a schoolhouse. He gets a dozen or so people there to commit themselves to put their kids in for a year. Now, where he got he was teaching reading and writing or whatever. Anyway, they had a troublemaker called from Carolina called William Flanagan. He was drunken. He drank a lot and everything. And he started arguing with Sharp. He wanted to go back to the Mississippi Territory, and he wanted to take his daughter or two kids out of school. Joseph said, no, you can't do that. You'll break up the school, you know, and everything. So one Sunday morning at the Lawrences there, Flanagan was eating with the Lawrences breakfast. He had his gun by the door. George shows up, comes into the door, Joseph. Flanagan was in a state of panic. He gets up, gets his gun, and runs out the door and goes around the cabin. Sharp and Lawrence go out, and from the backside of him appears William Flanagan. Flanagan shoots Sharp in the back. Sharp's lying, dying. He says, he shot me with my powder and ball, I'll own him on that. He says, please take care of my family. He had two sons and a daughter. Anyway, the son was 9 or 10, the oldest one, Joseph, named after him. Oh, we have to go back to Zachariah. After George left Mandeville, Bayou Castan, a hurricane hits Zachariah up Bayou Castan. He gets up to live with several people. Richardson came down. He left Natchez, came down, and this is in the court case, came down to Lake Pontchartrain, saw the land that was abandoned by Widow Ambrose, and he settles on it, which is right on the causeway as you go across. So anyway, a storm drives Zachariah out. He had to live with some people. He lived with one, but he met Martha Richardson, the daughter. She was a little older and he was a little older too. They started living together. And he sells the land, that the 640 acres, it's on there, and to another guy, and another guy sells it and so forth. Anyway, Zachariah became the uncle because Martha had a younger sister who married Joseph up in Natchez. So now we have, and he says uncle, and actually Zachariah gives Joseph 200 acres of the land confirmed by the United States government. But anyway, so Zachariah marries, and they start living together, and they, nobody had property. Elizabeth Spell comes into the picture. She's the daughter of John Spell. She's the wife of John Spell. I'm not yet. Anyway, she marries and she has the property next to him. Get the book, Donald J. From the American Revolution to Maroney, and you'll see all the information on there. They became a big court case. It happened, and it was one of the longest court cases running. It started in 1825, and it ended way up about 1829. But anyway, the uncle going back to when Joseph was killed, he says, take care of his wife Elizabeth. They take the oldest one, Joseph, and send him to live with Uncle Zachariah on the lakefront. He says, I came there as a young boy and everything, and so on. But anyway, his brother William comes back a few years later.
William Fritz?
Yeah, William Sharp, and I have a big chart of him. They both had big families. William was lucky because the yellow fever really did a dent in Joseph, and I want to tell you about that in a minute. But where were we? Okay, so Joseph's in Mandeville. This trespassing. Elizabeth Spell's slaves were cutting timber on what would be Zachariah's land. Zachariah didn't say anything. Why was Zachariah's land? Because the federal government said, we want to get this thing straight legally, who owns the land? But you had to be living on it before 1803 and approve it, which Zachariah was. And they gave him the land there. David Bannister Morgan surveyed it during the court trial, and there's a map. He says it was 651 acres, which was wrong. He had 630, 500 and something. Anyway, when they surveyed it again, it was 631 acres. Before this court trial, Zachariah, before he died, he gave Joseph, his nephew, 200 acres of the land of the 600 acres all the way down the line. So they couldn't have a court trial with Joseph owning the land and saying that they're suing him, saying it was our problem. It wasn't their problem, it was Joseph's problem. So Joseph quickly sells it to the new husband of Martha. And it's all in that story, the book on that. So I'm not going to get into that. So the first Sharp in Mandeville was George. About 20 years ago, I get a letter from a lady. I got the name and everything, and I'll find it. She says, Donald, one of your, we're in the same family, I'm a distant relative, and I'm doing the research on the Sharps. And I've been going to different counties. I went to Paris County to the courthouse, and there was a will. I'm saying Elizabeth. I'll have to check again. Maybe it was a different. I thought it was Elizabeth. But she says, I'm very old. I'm assuming she was around 90. And I don't know what happened to my kids and all that. And I'm making this will out. She had a couple still left there and all that. But she says, anyway, she starts naming the children. And I remembered 3 of them, 4 of them. There was one at the bottom that became very prosperous later on, the youngest one in manufacturing Kentucky whiskey and all this and that. But anyway, she mentions George. She mentions Joseph. She mentions James. How much of a coincidence? And she never heard from him again, you know. And Joseph, of course, was killed. She didn't know about it. But anyway, so...
And you want to tell us what happened to Flanagan?
Oh, Flanagan. Yeah, I'll tell you. You go into the Spanish West Florida Archives, volumes 8 and 9. You can go to the library and get it. Look in there. After the murder, they notified the Alcalde, was the sheriff or the thing, the Spanish authority. They got a posse together, and they caught him on his horses and everything, north of the line in American territory.
In Mississippi.
And yeah, they had to let him go, but they kept his horses and everything. So, drunkard William Flanagan, who murdered, well, I don't know what happened to him, but I'll tell you this. About 30 years ago, I get a call from a guy saying he's a student at Tulane, a professor or something, and he's doing research on Flanagans. And he says they're over in West Florida there, and saying, do I know anything about them? I said, yeah, go to the Spanish archives and you'll figure out how your ancestor killed my. There was a long pause. I never heard from him again. And he stopped doing his research. But that's how Joseph got killed.
Yeah. Because a lot of people don't know that St. Tammany and Washington Parish and St. Helena were in the Florida, what do you call it? The Florida
Parishes.
Florida parishes
It was
were
Florida
not
territory.
part of.
It was West Florida.
Right. It was not part of the Louisiana Purchase.
No, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But anyway, I want to tell you that I'm still doing research, not on the Sharps anymore, but the history of they call it the North Shore, but it was also to St. Helena.
Yeah.
And it's got very, there was a man doing, started in 1774 in Bayou Lacombe, experimenting with a steam pot to move a boat. The first, his name's James Rumsey. Go to your computer and call up the Donald J. Sharp blogs, and you'll get all this.
Okay.
Now I'm doing the lighthouses, and there's more.
Yeah.
It's very, almost as fascinating as Rumsey.
But do you have any information about the parents of Joseph Sharp from Bourbon County, Kentucky?
No, but in this will, I'm assuming it's got to be the same person. I don't have a notary public saying, yeah, you're right, you know, I agree with it or something like that. But she says, my husband was James Sharp. Now, she named it James. And his father was a James Sharp. So now you're going into the Scotch-Irish migration into the United States. The story is, I got it from the computer or whatever, that three brothers, when the migration started in Belfast, Northern Ireland, what made them move was the desire to own their land. Only the nobles owned their land before. And it was fighting and killing all over the place. Protestant, Catholics, and things like that. So three brothers around 1730 got on a boat and came to the United States, and they landed in Pennsylvania where the Scotch-Irish are. One of them, named Joseph, stayed up there, I believe. You'll find this out on the computer. And the other two brothers came down the Wilderness Road before the American Revolution to Kentucky. And just when it was opening up, when the American Revolution broke out, two of them, they were scouts and everything. They participated in the war. After the war was over, they knew about the land opening up. And one was Moses, Sharpsburg, Kentucky, is named after Moses Sharp. But I have never placed, he was probably one of the brothers of the James Sharp, who was his son or something like that. But they were related. James Sharp came down and settled at a place called Jackstown. How do I know that? When after I taught in Europe, I got my little Volkswagen, landed in New York and came down, and I stopped at Sharpsburg. It's all in my volumes. And I'm talking to this guy, he says, yeah. He says, it's not anymore, but 20 miles from Sharpsburg was a little settlement called Jackstown. So that fits in there. And James Sharp's had these kids and so forth, was married, and one of them was named George. And when they grew up, they moseyed over to where Boonesboro was, and they were starting to get flatboats together, go down the river. And Zachariah, who left Carolina because he was a loyalist, he fought on the loyalist side, he buddied up with George. They came down. They had experiences with an alligator getting stranded on a river, and it's all in this diary. And the reason why they came, it was called Bayou Castan there. They loved the land, and the governor was so impressed with the generosity. He not only gave John Holly a lot of leeway, but when George asked for land, he says, I'll give it. I'm doing away with the waivers. You go over there and you can live on there. You don't have to wait 4 years. You don't have to do this or that. So he got the 640 Upper Bayou Cascade. He left. Zachariah took it over. Zachariah was by himself in the woods. A storm came and wiped him out. He went to live with it's just my story, the people living on the lakefront. He met Martha Richardson. They started to live. They got married right before the trial. He died in 1823. A year right before the trial started. Zachariah was gone. They asked Zachariah, "Don't you have a family back east?" He says, "Yeah, I have an uncle that lives back in Virginia, but I haven't seen him in a long time." So we have Zachariah, who's the uncle of this Joseph Sharp, whose father was killed by William Flanagan. Do you have any other? Did I touch?
I just wanted to say thank you
Oh.
for letting us do this, and also for donating your Y-DNA and letting me not only share it with the one website but others, because that way we can trace back further than Joseph William Sharp, 1794.
Skip, the trip is not over with. I'm leaving it, passing the baton on to the next people. It's going to be tough because Belfast is going to be tough to crack. But I want to say, where did the Sharps come from? I think they came from Northern Ireland. There were Sharps in England, English Sharps. You got to be careful. And they even had a Sharp German.
Yeah.
Yeah. But our Sharps were Scotch-Irish.
Right.
And I think they were related to James Sharp, the Archbishop of Scotland, in the late 1600s and 1700s. That's going to be a toughie.
Well, I'm collecting other Y-DNA along with yours and matching them.
Yeah.
And that'll help us.
Yeah.
That'll help us triangulate
Yeah.
and go find out the answer to that. So thank you very much.
Now, well, we're not through. If I find as soon, you don't want to go at my house. Well, but I took it out. I got to put my 30 volumes together in the room stacked up with clothes and stuff like that. But you need Elizabeth, which I'm almost sure it was Elizabeth. It goes with that. And the chart you already have about how it goes. That needs to be added in. New people are coming in. And what else was there? Was something else. But anyway, Doris Holden I met in a courthouse. She came over to my apartment a couple of times on the floor with all my papers. A lot of the stuff that she had was mine, but I gladly gave it to her. And she did a wonderful job over the years. Your chart goes with that book.
I'm getting the book.
Yeah, you got to have it. There is a second chart on William. Oh, William.
I've got that.
William found out that he was living on the land in dispute, Goodby's land. It was, on Zachariah. So he left in 1828, and he moved up to, what is it, the Bogue Cheddar, Folsom, up there. Mm-hmm. And he had 10 kids, and there's a Sharp's Chapel. I went up there, and I said, I wanted to meet anybody that knew anything about the Sharp. They said, oh, go see Morgani, Aunt Morgani. It's on the chart. So I go see her, and there's about 5 or 6 little kids. They had red hair like Scotch, and all that. And I said, and she had a box of pictures, get-togethers, old people but she had no names on them, and she didn't know it. Anyway, I said, how do you know that they came from Kentucky? Kentucky. They told me the story, and I know it. We came from Kentucky. And so with that, from Aunt Morgani that's in the chart, I accepted it, and with the papers that we did come from Kentucky, all the things they had.
Right.
It's an interesting story, and it goes with the history of the North Shore and Mandeville. Get my book.
Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
No, we're not through yet. I'll find.
Okay.
You're the only one that really shows interest in it. You meet people every now and then, but mainly, I'll tell you, the North Shore, the reason why, that's not on.
You want me to cut it now?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay. Oh, I know you got to go and get busy selling real estate. Oh, I wanted to tell you something. I told you I'm not interested in selling my 40 acres, but I did find out one thing. A crier called me, Eric Crier, and he said because they had a mistake made in the